So in Mark 7, does Jesus declare all foods clean? Well, interestingly, he does, but he doesn't. Usually what we would do is we would read the text and then we would try to figure out what's going on. Well, I think it's probably better that I just tell you what's going on and then you go read the text for yourself. So you and I, as Western thinkers, and a lot of times in the East, we think of food in terms of nutritional value. If we can put it in our mouth, chew it up, and add something to our bodies so that way we don't die, then it's food. We wouldn't think of a chair or a table as food, so it's all about nutritional value. But in the Bible, especially to those Hebrews, they didn't think about food like that at all. Instead, food was defined by God. It was what was acceptable or not acceptable. If God said it was something that you could put in your mouth and chew it up and put it in your body, then it was food. If God said it wasn't, then it wasn't food. So even if it had nutritional value, it wasn't food if God didn't say it was food. So God at Sinai defined everything that was acceptable to put in your mouth. That was food. And that's it. Now, why would God define certain things as food? Well, even though the Bible is not explicit, it does seem that there's some circumstantial evidence, and that evidence is that God doesn't like things that associates with death. God doesn't like death, repels death, doesn't want that to be a part of what his children are about. And so he says, hey, I don't want you to put that in your mouth. I don't want you to be consuming that. Now, are things like pigs and oysters and all that good? Well, yeah, they are good. They have a function in our world. They get rid of a lot of the waste and all that. And even though that in itself is probably not good for us to eat, that is kind of missing the point. But regardless, God had already defined what was food and what was not food. And so here we come to Mark chapter 7. The Pharisees have stumbled, probably wasn't like that, Jesus and the disciples are eating food, a Hebrew mindset of food, without having first washed their hands. And they had a bunch of rabbinic laws. And I wouldn't say that those are bad things. The Pharisees in many ways are just trying to make the eating process even more holy. But the thing is that they became sort of like politicians, or politicians today value their worth and all that based on how many laws they can make. And the same was going on with the Pharisees. They had a bunch of teachings and, how smart were they and what could they add? And the thing is that God was just saying, no, I don't actually want you to add anything to my laws. What I want you to do is I want you just to interpret properly my laws and help my sheep know how to follow them. Don't go adding a bunch of stuff. Well, the Pharisees come upon the disciples. They haven't washed their hands. And so now, because they haven't washed their hands, they felt like the thing that they were eating without washed hands was now unacceptable to God. Therefore, it was not food. But the fact was, it was food. So, what happens? Jesus confronts the Pharisees because the Pharisees obviously have this question. And Jesus says, hey, you keep following the traditions of men, but you neglect the laws of God. In fact, Jesus said, you go so far as to call everything Korban. Now, in the Talmud, it says that, even if you call something Korban, which is like set apart, a way to draw near to God through that thing, if you even call it Korban, now it's dedicated to the temple. And the Pharisees would do that. They would actually neglect their mom and dad, and maybe they were showboating or whatever, but they would quickly call something Korban. I'm not exactly sure how it works because I wasn't there, but in all the scholarly books and such, you'd call something Corban, and essentially what they were doing is they were paying more mind to the tabernacle and their prestige than they were their mom and dad. So Jesus calls them on the carpet, and then after that scenario, Jesus is with people and he says, hey, look everyone, you need to understand something. You put something in your mouth and it goes through your body and it comes out. Now here, we're not talking about whether something's clean or unclean, food or unfood. In their mind, it's only just what God had already defined as food. But in this text, Jesus is talking about hypocrisy. And he's talking about those Pharisees could eat food, God's food, all day long, but that's not what makes them clean or unclean. What makes them clean or unclean is what's going on inside their heart. Their sin on the inside. That needs to be dealt with. And so he addresses that with the people. And so by saying all these things, it says that Jesus declared all foods clean by what he was saying. He wasn't redefining food in terms of nutritional value. In the text, all he's doing is he's saying the traditions of men, this doesn't matter. What matters is that we follow what God has already said is food, and that we do that with a pure heart, a circumcised heart. So, go back and read over the text. He's not redefining food. He's just saying what was already defined as food is clean. But even that is not the issue. It's about a pure heart. Now don't take what I just said as now that gives me license to go eat whatever I want. That it's not. It's because that was never what the text was about. It was about hypocrisy and true uncleanness. And so I think a lot of people would say to me, well, are you now reducing my relationship with Jesus to a piece of bacon? Is that how shallow you are? I'm not that shallow. All I want to do is respond to God's grace and do what God has asked me to do. The question I had to face was I so shallow that I wasn't willing to give up a piece of bacon or an oyster or something like that and let that come between me and my relationship with God, because I did not want God to dictate what was food and what was not food. I did not want God to determine what was good and what was evil. I wanted to determine that. So, this really isn't about food. It's about the condition of our heart. Even this talk, it's about the condition of our heart. But at the same time, we've got to obey. That is what God requires of us. That's what it means to be disciples, that we would trust him and his ordinances, his statutes, his commandments. And even Jesus said, if you love me, you'll obey what I command. And last time I checked, Jesus and God are the same thing. So, when you go back and read through that text, know there's a difference between the Western idea of food and the Hebrew idea of food and unfood, only based on what God has defined as food. I'll see you next week.